Hi, Tori.
Hey Stephanie, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks so much for talking to us about all this today. I want to start off with hearing about you. So, you have a super cool job. Please tell us about where you work.
All right, well I do. I'm really lucky. I work for the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History on the Mall in Washington D.C., and I'm a curator of archaeology in the Department of Anthropology, where I've been since about 2008. It's a really fun place to work.
What is your favorite thing about that job?
That's a great question. I really like all aspects of it. One of the things I love about it is just the diversity of things that we get to do. If I had to say like my number one favorite, it would definitely be working with collections. We have just such rich collections, and the materials we have, the objects, the artifacts, the faunal remains from archaeological research really spans the globe and all sorts of time periods. So it's really amazing the types of research we're able to do with the collections, and then also they lend themselves to such great opportunities for engagement with indigenous communities and Native American tribal members, for students, and then also for outreach opportunities. So for me, it's the collections are the best thing because they're the gateway to everything else.
Oh, absolutely. And I can only imagine the stories that are in those collections. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so, I want to hear about how did you get into archaeology and what has kept you in it all these years?
Um, yeah, so I first got into archaeology when I was an undergrad. I actually grew up out in California and went to UC Santa Barbara, and I sort of stumbled into an introductory archaeology class taught by Brian Fagan. And Brian, as many of us know, has popularized archaeology and written many textbooks on the subject. And he was a really compelling lecturer that sort of piqued my curiosity. But what really got me into it was a course I took after that on California archaeology, taught by one of my mentors, Mike Glassow, and I just fell in love with the course because I learned all about this past, this rich Native American history that I knew very little about growing up in California. And I learned that there was really this entire world that sits, just beneath our feet wherever we go. And then when I moved here to the East Coast and the DC area in 2008, I got really interested in Chesapeake Bay archaeology and have been doing projects in parts of Maryland and Virginia ever since.
Yeah, Tori, I was just out traveling in California, and I realized I was relatively close to the Channel Islands, and and thinking about all the work you've done out there. I was like, can I make it out there? It was way too windy. It wasn't going to work out that day, but it's on my bucket list. I got to get out there.
Yeah, next time you got to do it. Make sure you go. Well, most times you go, you'll get some whale watching or good dolphin watching too on the boat ride out.
Well, I want to hear about the topic of your Maryland Archaeology Month essay because I know it was all about the work that you've been doing here in the Bay for the last, what, decade, better part of a decade.
Yeah, yeah. Since really about 2009, 2010.
So, what did you write about?
So, I my interest a lot is trying to use the past as a vehicle to help us understand how we arrived at the present, and then as a way to kind of understand the future and where we might be headed. And so, I was really interested in understanding how archaeological sites that are all around us, especially in this case, shell middens full of oysters that we see all around the bay, and that are, at almost every nice Maryland state park on the bay at least, there's a shell midden somewhere nearby. Those sites, they stand out like sore thumbs because of all the shell that they have, but they also have really rich soils. And so we were interested in knowing about the properties of those soils and how they differed from the soils adjacent to them, and then how that might influence plants growing on them. But before we could get to that issue of like, do shell middens influence the soils which influence plants today, we had to understand how old these sites were. And we needed to kind of anchor them in time, which is sort of the key thing for all archaeologists. And now many of us do that by using artifacts, the pottery types or projectile points we might have, give us indications of various time periods. But one of the ways we do that, most often is using radiocarbon dating. And so the technological aspect of our work was using AMS radiocarbon dating, or accelerator mass spectrometry, a technique that's been around for a while, but that gives us really high precision absolute dates for an archaeological site, sometimes with just 25 to 50-year error ratios. And you can analyze all sorts of materials from small seeds and plant remains to charcoal to uh, shell, as we often do, to bone. And so we started out identifying some Schellmans and then doing a lot of accelerator mass spectrometry radiocarbon dating to identify those sites in time. And then once we did that, we applied techniques to look at the soils and plants that were growing on them.
So what were some of your conclusions when it came to that relationship?
Well, so the interesting part was we had first, using the radiocarbon dating, found that we had sites that dated from like 3,000 years ago, and this was actually some work we did in collaboration with you a number of years ago on the Road River. And so we identified these sites back to the early woodland 3,200 years ago, and then had a more or less continuous record all the way up to the 1800s. And so then we chose a few of those sites that we had really dated very well, and analyzed the soils that were there. And so we looked at a whole range of different characteristics, from pH to the calcium content, to the nitrates that are in the soil, to a range of other issues. And we found that a site, an archaeological site, or Shellmidden in this case, has really different soils in an area just right adjacent to it. You could be 10 feet off site and the soils are fundamentally different. And that shows us that those shells and bones and all the things that people deposited a couple hundred to 3,000 years ago influence the soils. And in this case, they make them much more nutrient rich. So soils where middens are rich in calcium, they're rich in nitrates, they're much more productive and well drained than places right next to them. And then, excuse me, we found right next to that, or on top of that, are plant communities, and that those are also fundamentally different. So you can have an area right next to a site where the soils are different, but the plants are also different. And that shows us that these sites where we literally have, thousands of Shellmans circling the Chesapeake Bay, they're also harboring unique plant communities. And in this case, they seem to be harboring more native and endemic plants than the areas right adjacent to them. So this is this kind of neat connection where we use the technology to identify how old these sites were. Then we did all this soil analysis and analysis of plants, and we show this really neat connection of how the past influences the present, and how people's activities in the past were really shaping the world around us that we see today. And I think that's something we don't often think, that the past it's literally alive in this case, right? It's literally alive in the plants that are there and being influenced by those soil conditions that in some cases are 3,000 years old. And to me, that was a really neat finding. And what we're hoping to do is expand that out and look elsewhere in Maryland. We did this in Anne Arundel County, and we'd love to be able to do it elsewhere in Maryland, Virginia, and then ultimately in other parts of the Atlantic coast.
No, that's really cool, Tori. And, I have to say, yeah, shell middens are certainly treasure troves of information about the past, but I love this perspective that you've taken on it. And, just looking at how it's influencing the world we see today, how the past is influencing us. So the last question is, how do you think that innovative technologies like some of these that you have employed are going to be improved upon in the future, and so that archaeologists and the public can just learn more about the past?
Yeah, that's, technology is such an important part of what we do, whether using geographic information systems, or in this case, AMS radiocarbon dating to anchor sites in time. They're always being improved upon. In our case, a lot of times what's most important is how you calibrate your radiocarbon date. And so, you get a radiocarbon date from a lab, but that's putting it in radiocarbon years, which is the amount of radiocarbon fluctuates through time. And so you then have to calibrate that based on known standards, so you can actually put it in a calendar year that makes more sense. Those curves are constantly being revised and improved upon, and they ultimately kind of come back to the technological aspect because they allow us to increase the precision and accuracy of the dates that we're reporting. And then, accelerator mass spectrometry was kind of a revolution when it first began used over conventional radiocarbon dating. And I'm really excited to see what might happen in 10 years as that technology continues to be improved and expanded upon. We're probably going to be able to date ever smaller bits of material with greater accuracy. And that's really exciting because, our science is destructive. Every time we excavate a site, we're pulling things out of the ground. Every time we run a radiocarbon date, we're destroying an amount of that material. And so the more that we can do to lessen that damage is really important, and also to increase the accuracy of the science that we're doing.
For sure. So, on behalf of Middle Atlantic archaeologists, thanks for all the work that you've done. It's just such a gift to us to learn more about these resources. that, like you said, there are just literally thousands of them all over the bay.
Yeah, thank you. I've had so much fun doing this work. I think we're really lucky to have such an amazing archaeological record here in Maryland, and also such an amazing community of archaeologists and students and tribal community members too that can all build a really great foundation for helping us understand the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Tori. It was great to talk to you. Good to see you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Great to talk to you too.